About 7 days ago, I was with our coming-of-age class of 14 and 15-year-olds in Boston, teaching them about the history of our faith tradition and its values. One of the moments together was us getting ready to walk into the Pride service at Arlington Street Church in Boston. Before we did so, we stood in front of a statue of William Ellery Channing on the Boston Public Gardens. Channing, the person whom our fellowship hall is named after, called the father of American Unitarianism. He's the first person to stand up and say, "You keep using Unitarian as a bad word." That's who we are. They formed a denomination of churches with similar values and thought patterns. He preached his most significant point of his career was that we have in us a likeness to God. That within every single human being there rests something of the holy, something of God moving within us. And as we prepared to walk into Arlington Street, we stopped at the statue of Channing so that I could go on and on with the kids about it. But here he was, this statue of the father of American Unitarianism, hundreds of years old, this statue standing on Boston Public Gardens of this man who would have not understood what we were about to do. Draped in a feather boa around his neck and ribbons hanging from the statue. This is the logical and reasonable progression of those ideas. Our ancestors, whether it was Emerson who said that the important thing was about Jesus was not that he was the Son of God, but a Son of God, and that if you got that you were a child of God, you would do great things too. Or Thoreau, who said that he needed to know what life was like and he wanted to know it through direct experience. Or Theodore Parker, preaching with a gun behind his pulpit to protect fugitive slaves in his church. Or Channing, who said there is something holy moving in you. We have a likeness to God. The people who formed this faith, the people who formed our liberal tradition in which we rest, said that the two important tenets that would guide our development were a loving God and a basic level of human dignity that spoke to something holy. They said that a God would not have created us in such a way that then that God would punish us for being created that way. And that if you could, through your own intuition and your reason and your feelings and your spirit, notice something of God, then it meant that God was in you too. And every time they preached that message, it had social implications. You couldn't preach that the body, the fragile dignity of a human life, held within it something sacred and not do something about it. It meant that if the skin that these old, dead, white, straight, mostly straight men were wearing was holy, then the conclusion that was people wearing brown and black skin were also holy, and therefore their rights had to be assured. And people wearing the skin of a woman's body also had to have their rights assured, and so on, and so on, and so on. That progression of a holy, fragile dignity that rests within the human spirit is the reason why we were about to go into a church service for Pride. It was more than politics, it was faith. As we were sitting at the base of that statue, before we went in, we talked to the kids about Stonewall. Most of them didn't know about it. Most of them had never heard of Stonewall and didn't know that the modern gay rights movement was formed through the struggle and violence and bloodshed out of a gay bar. Most of them are growing up in a world that feels different than the one that most of you have experienced around these issues, and certainly even different than the world I grew up in around them. So we explained to them that all of the benefits and rights, the sea change of justice that we have watched in the past few years didn't come easy, and it came through the blood, literally, of those who would fight for justice. We reminded them of that, then we walked in. Arlington Street Church in Boston is the church that Channing pastored years ago. One of the drafts of the United States Constitution was ratified in that congregation. It's also one of the first congregations to ever have an out LGBT person as their pastor, my mentor, Kim. They've been hosting a pride service there for 47 years. It was my first church job. I was basically the director of religious education there when I was 22. Congregation was about 80% LGBT when I was there. I was the only straight person on staff, and they taught me a lot. A lot. Basically about all that I didn't know. So we went into that church and we prayed and sang and celebrated. And they did what they do every year. They read the names aloud of people who have died. We told the kids, these are not just people that people in the room know who have died. These are people who have died because of who they were. These are people that their friends watched waste away in the AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s. These are people who were beaten or killed because of the body they wore. These are people who took their own life because of the shame inflicted on them by our culture. As we read their names aloud or spoke them into the room, we responded for them present. We went outside and we watched the parade together, which has almost become mainstream at this point. Bank of America has a contingent. Every major bank or hospital, the mayor of Boston, the governor of Massachusetts, their state senators and representatives are walking along as if it was the most normal thing in the world, and I found myself crying in the street watching this moment. Particularly when I saw the moment where families were walking together, gay dads and their sons, straight kids, their LGBTQ parents. I found myself crying in the street of the progress I thought we had made. We went back to the place we were staying. We processed the event as a group, and everyone was joyful. All the kids, all the adults, about the progress we've made. And then 10 hours later, I woke up and found myself crying in a different church for a different reason. I was preparing to go to worship at King's Chapel with the students, the oldest Unitarian church in the country. They have a formal Episcopal liturgy. It looks like 1820s Unitarian worship. We were getting ready to go into this traditional service, and I got my morning Sunday ritual of a cup of coffee and the news, and there it was. Once again, a mass shooting, this time in the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, a gay bar. And I watched in real time as the numbers went up of the dead, 20, 30, 40, as I sat in the pew checking my phone before worship started, wanting to know the toll of this, 50 people gone. And in this formal church, which worships the same way it does since Paul Revere made the bell there, the young associate pastor, a gay man, stood up and preached about what he had just heard. It occurred to me when we were sitting there that it was exactly 1 year ago this week. 1 year ago this week that I had to stand in this pulpit and we mourned those dead in Charleston. That we read their names aloud from this pulpit, and we went to candlelight vigils in their names as more human bodies were broken by weapons of war because of the skin that they were wearing. Is this what we do on Father's Day now? Is this our natural national ritual where every Father's Day I will stand in this pulpit? Whose children next year will we stand and mourn because of the bodies that they wore? I watched the news unfold and people making the motives muddied and the usual politics evolving only minutes after the news. But the results were clear. You don't have to explain anything else to me except for the fact that almost 50 LGBT bodies were broken and killed in that place. What are we going to do? If this was a movie, the plot line would have an uprising of action. Something would and must be done. People a year ago, when all those individuals were killed in their sanctuary in Charlestown, pundits and politicians and pastors spoke as if they were shocked that racism still existed. I remember the governor of South Carolina saying, and I believe honestly, saying, how could this happen here while the Confederate flag flew over her state house? And the same again. People trying very hard to pretend that hatred and bigotry and homophobia had nothing to do with the death of these precious human souls. When just this time last year, the same people who were offering up their thoughts and prayers were telling me that if my friends got married, it would rip the fabric of American society apart. The same people whose prayers today ring hollow to me, who say that they are praying with the families of the dead, and just a few weeks ago were calling my friends and family and congregants perverted and dangerous because of walking into a bathroom. God of love, human dignity. It's our ministry. I don't know exactly what I can do or what we can do. But I do know that if I'm calling out my own sin here, and I use that word very cautiously, my own sin is naivete and complacency. It has been too easy for me in this body to be naive and complacent about the risks that my dear friends and loved ones face to their very lives. Just this year, 30 people have been beaten because of who they are in Oak Lawn and Cedar Springs, just down the street from this congregation. And what have I done? I cannot remain complacent as 30 people are beaten for who they are only a minute's drive away from the congregation I serve. I cannot be complacent about the fact that 50 people are now dead because of the body that they wear. I cannot be complacent knowing that black and brown bodies are still disproportionately killed because of the color of their skin. All the while, these populations saying to our society, we're dying. When black and brown people have to march through the streets and proclaim Black Lives Matter, it's because they honestly believe that to the culture around them they don't. When GLBT people have to stand up and march in a parade for pride, it's because the culture around them has promoted shame because of the casing that they wear, the skin, the body that their soul inhabits. I don't know what I can do. I don't know. But what I can do is draw the line in public discourse now. For so long, I have stood in this pulpit, time after time, week after week, asking me and asking you to treat those who disagree with us with kindness and respect, decency and civility, and I will continue to make that call. And yet, I will no longer pretend that a discussion about whether our loved ones in the LGBT community deserve basic human rights is a disagreement, a reasonable disagreement. I will not stand and act as if I have to defend inclusion and basic human dignity to them. They must explain bigotry to us. I cannot stand here